So how's everybody doing out there? I'm Jeff Camp. Those of you who don't know me, I do a lot of webinars, and unfortunately I can't be with you in person, but this is the next best thing. I'm a college professor working at Raritan Valley. I'm also teaching virtually. So this is the next best thing. And today we're going to do a very special presentation paying tribute to our veterans for Veterans Day. And after you see this presentation, I think that it will remind you that it is with honor that we pay tribute to our veterans every year. So let's get started. We're going to look at the history of Veterans Day. It began with World War I. Start with a quote. "We often take for granted the very things that deserve our gratitude." Cynthia Ozick, a great American writer and poet. So again, it started with World War I. World War I lasted from 1914 to 1918. From 1914 to 1918, the nations of Europe pounded each other into annihilation in the war to end all wars. So again, this is also known as the Great War. An estimated 40 million people died in this war. 20 million of them were civilians. Just can't imagine. So here's General Pershing on the left. You see our veterans, or actually our soldiers from World War I, about to become veterans in the middle. And the great poster that came out of World War I with Uncle Sam, "I Want You." World War I came to an end officially on June 28th in 1919 with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. A ceasefire, however, had actually begun on November 11th, 1918. The Great War had actually ended on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. This is when we celebrate Veterans Day now. Okay, so this date, regardless of the signing of the treaty, is often considered the end of the war, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. So we're going to remember their sacrifice. So many vets came back from World War I, either with amputated limbs, post-traumatic stress syndrome, totally obliterated with all kinds of injuries and problems. President Woodrow Wilson was our president at this time. To us in America, the reflections of Armistice Day will be filled with solemn pride in the heroism of those who died in the country's service and with gratitude for the victory, both because of the thing from which it was freed us and because of the opportunity it has given America to show her sympathy with peace and justice in the Council of the Nations. President Wilson first made this a national holiday. So we can thank President Wilson for Veterans Day. Armistice Day was the name of our first holiday to recognize veterans, again on November 11th. Originally called for parades and public meetings on this day, with business closing briefly at 11 a.m. to join in the celebrations. But today, banks, post offices, etc., are closed all day. So June 4th in 1926, on this date, the United States Congress passed a resolution requesting November 11th be recognized by the President as a day of remembrance and the celebration of Veterans Day in the United States. So June 4th, 1926, it was passed by Congress. May 13th in 1938, on this date, the United States Congress declared Armistice Day a legal holiday. Though originally to honor World War I veterans, it will again go through another change that would make us make a change. So again, May 13th, 1938, what would make us make a change? Well, another war, right? Another war, unfortunately. So today we recognize all our veterans. June 1st, 1954, on this date, the United States Congress amended the 1938 law to include all veterans of war. Why? Well, World War II, the largest war fought by the United States, had ended 9 years earlier. We had Korea, Vietnam, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, the Gulf War, the Cold War. So think about all the wars from, again, World War I, and all of our veterans are honored on November 11th, Veterans Day. So on October 8th in 1954, President Dwight D. Eisenhower created the Veterans Day National Committee to help unite civic and governmental agencies in celebrating this holiday. October 8th, 1954, from this date on, Armistice Day would now be known as Veterans Day, and it would forever include all veterans of all United States wars, right? So Armistice Day is now known as Veterans Day. In June 28th, 1968, on this date, the United States Congress passed the Uniform Holiday Bill. Its purpose was to create 4 national holidays on Mondays to give federal employees long weekends. October 25th in 1971, on this date, the new day for Veterans Day was observed. With much confusion throughout the nation, it was an overwhelming failure, as most wanted it to be returned to its original date, right? So again, November 11th is Veterans Day. October 25th did not work. September 20th in 1975, on this date, President Gerald Ford signed a bill returning Veterans Day to November 11th. So this officially began on November 11th, 1978. So they gave it a try in 1971, but in 1975, Veterans Day was moved back to the original date of November 11th. So the American Revolution, 217,000 served from 1775 to 1783. The War of 1812, 290,000 served from 1812 to 1814. The Mexican-American War, 78,000 served from 1845 to 1848. The Civil War, 2.2 million served from 1861 to 1865. The Spanish-American War, 306,000 served in 1898. World War I, 4.7 million served from 1917 to 1918. World War II, 16 million served from 1941 to 1945. The Korean War, which was actually just a conflict, 5.7 million served from 1950 to 1953. And the Vietnam War, again, wasn't really a war. I say it was, but it was actually a conflict. And it's also called the War of Indochina. 8.7 million served from 1965 to 1975, including many of my friends. The Gulf War, again a conflict, 2.2 million served from 1990 to 1991. And current conflicts, the war in Iraq, the Gulf War, and of course, the war in Afghanistan. Over 1.3 million are serving in our armed forces today. So our veterans, over 43 million Americans have saved this country since its birth. Currently, there are 24 million veterans living in the United States, over 18 million combat veterans. This is a national military cemetery where veterans can be buried. Of course, it's called Arlington National Cemetery. The final resting place for unidentified military personnel is also called the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and there are currently 3 unknown soldiers resting there. The highest salute you can receive in the military, of course, and some of my family members have actually had this. It's the 21 gun salute. That's the highest salute that you can receive, the 21 gun salute. You know what? Let's read this. I was a proud veteran that served my country well. To those that would listen, I had many stories to tell. We fought for America's freedom in faraway places, on foreign land. Wherever the battle for democracy raged, America's finest made a stand. We fought for your future and the right to remain free, for we saw what freedom meant to those not blessed with liberty. For you and yours, we would gladly have given our life. We faced the fears and perils of battle. We braved endless turmoil and strife. Please remember us, veterans, and the sacrifices we made for you. Please share the blessings of freedom. Proudly wave the red, white, and blue. This nation will remain the land of the free only so long as it is the home of the brave. So I want to go and look at some quotes that I picked out for you. These are quotes about our veterans, some of them by some very famous people. We are not retreating. We are advancing in another direction. General Douglas MacArthur. The supreme quality for leadership is unquestionably integrity. Without it, no real success is possible, no matter whether it is on a section gang, a football field, in an army, or in an office. To be prepared for war is one of the most effective means of preserving the peace. President George Washington. We make war that we may live in peace. Aristotle. Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and success of liberty. President John F. Kennedy. Some people live an entire lifetime and wonder if they've ever made a difference in the world, but the Marines don't have that problem. President Ronald Reagan. What a great quote. A true leader has the confidence to stand alone, the courage to make tough decisions, and the compassion to listen to the needs of others. He does not set out to be a leader, but becomes one by the equality of his actions and the integrity of his intent. General Douglas MacArthur. Valor is stability, not of legs and arms, but of courage and the soul. Courage is almost a contradiction in terms. It means a strong desire to live, taking the form of readiness to die. The famous historian and Brit G.K. Chesterton. As we express our gratitude, we must never forget that the highest appreciation is not to utter words, but to live by them. President John F. Kennedy. Veterans, thank you for your service. We wish you a happy Veterans Day. Fantastic, right? And with a lot of meaning. This one here. As we express our gratitude, we must never forget the highest appreciation is not to utter words, but to live by them, which we haven't seen of late. It's something that should ring in your ears, this quote by President John F. Kennedy. So let's get to some videos. We're going to start with honoring our veterans. A solemn video. It's a solemn day. I had a couple friends who died in Vietnam, and thinking about them right now as we are presenting this tribute to our veterans who have sacrificed so much and continue to sacrifice so much. And they come first. America comes first. And it should always remain that way. Democracy comes first. So many have died for our liberty, for our freedom. And I'm sorry if I'm a very emotional person right now. I'm really very emotional, and I'm somewhat angry at what's going on in our country today. When I think about our veterans and how much they sacrificed to keep the world free, to keep us free. So let's take a look at a tribute to Ray Lambert, a famous soldier in World War II, portrayed by Sam Elliott. I think you're going to get blown away by this. When I first saw this, I was totally blown away by this. So let's do it.
Here to tell Sergeant Lambert's story is this year's Academy Award nominated actor, Sam Elliott.
We were headed to Omaha Beach, and I was glad. After all the fighting in Africa and Sicily, I just wanted to get this war over with. It was daylight on the 6th. I went up on deck and found my brother Bill there. We talked about our chances and what our parents would think. About 6 a.m., the signal came to go to stations. My brother and I promised whoever survived would take care of the other's family. And we shook hands and went our separate ways. I climbed down the nets and got into the Higgins boat with my unit. On the way in, we could hear the battleships firing and see the big shells landing ahead of us. Guys were getting sick and vomiting from the choppy water and the diesel fumes. As we got in closer, the Germans had a bird's eye view of us coming in. We picked up machine gun fire. The bullets clanged against the metal ramp of the boat like hail. Then the big 88s on the hill opened up. Every time a shell whistled overhead, all you could hear was the sound of a banshee screaming. Boats around us were burning. I saw men on fire. Even their shoes were on fire. Dead and wounded were floating in the water. We had orders not to stop and pick anyone up. I told my men, when the ramp drops, hit the water hard and keep as low as you can to dodge the bullets. We sank up over our heads. That was the last time I saw most of them. 31 men jumped off that boat. Just 7 of them made it to the beach. The only cover was a block of concrete the Germans had failed to clear. That's where I set up a collection point for the casualties. Medics were trained not to dig in. We were there to see the troops and for them to see us. I detailed Corporal Raymond Lepore to hunker down and treat the men while I brought in the injured. Ray and I had been together since '39. I knew I could count on him. It was total confusion. Shells exploding, boats blowing up, people yelling because they couldn't hear anything, machine gun bullets hitting the water all around you, the roar of the boats coming in. It's like you're all alone in a world of 1 million people because you're concentrating on what you have to do. Hadn't gone far when I felt a bullet go through my right arm. I just kept going. I was thinking of only one thing, getting to the men who needed me. There was a soldier laying right on the edge of the water. One arm was almost shot off. Every time a wave would come in, that arm would be pulled back out to sea, and he'd try to reach out for it. The first thing you're supposed to do is keep a wounded man from going into shock. But he was too far gone. Nothing I could do for him. He died in my arms. I was on my way to treat another soldier when a piece of shrapnel the size of my hand tore a hole in my left thigh. I put a tourniquet on it, gave myself a shot of morphine, and went back to work. You did the job you were trained to do. If you didn't, you died. I could feel my right arm going numb from the first bullet. Saw a guy struggling in chest-deep water. Grabbed him with my good arm just as a Higgins boat rolled in and dropped its ramp. The ramp hit me right in the back, crushed 2 vertebrae, and pushed us both to the bottom. That's when I started talking to the one guy I knew could help me. I said, God, I've asked you many times, but just give me another chance. Let me save one more person. And for some reason, that boat raised its ramp and backed out. Somehow I managed to drag his boat to safety. I told Corporal Lepore he'd have to take my place. He stood up, and then he just collapsed against my shoulder. His helmet fell off, and I saw the hole right in the center. Everything went black after that. The next thing I knew, I was on a boat going back to England. A Navy doctor looked at my dog tags and he told me, we have another Lambert here. My brother's Bill's stretcher was put right next to mine on the dock at Weymouth. He'd been on the beach with G Company. We went to the hospital in the same ambulance. When I woke up, he was on the cot next to me. He looked over and said, what are you doing here? Same thing you are, I told him. And he said, oh God, now what's Mother gonna think? We both made it out okay. Bill lived to be 92. People who have never been in a war should understand what soldiers give up. The guys we left on Omaha Beach never had a chance to live the lives they've dreamed of. Day hasn't gone by when I haven't prayed for the men we lost and their families. I still wake up at night sometimes thinking about the guys. Every man that walked into those machine guns and that artillery fire on Omaha Beach that day, every man was a hero. What kind of person would I be if I didn't tell their stories? Such an honor. Such an honor, sir, to tell your story. God bless you.
I am very familiar with Ray Lambert from a book, a fantastic book called The Longest Winter by Alex Kershaw. The Longest Winter by Alex Kershaw, all about Ray Lambert and his sacrifice. And it's just an amazing story, how he survived. Let's continue with our tribute. I'm going to play a speech by Ronald Reagan. It's one of my favorites. So let's take a look at that.
A few moments ago, I placed a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. And as I stepped back and stood during the moment of silence that followed, I said a small prayer. And it occurred to me that each of my predecessors has had a similar moment, and I wondered if our prayers weren't very much the same, if not identical. We celebrate Veterans Day on the anniversary of the armistice that ended World War I, the armistice that began on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. And I wonder, in fact, if all Americans' prayers aren't the same as those I mentioned a moment ago. For all we can ever do for our heroes is remember them and remember what they did, and memories are transmitted through words. We see these soldiers in our mind as old and wise. We see them as something like the founding fathers, grave and gray-haired. But most of them were boys when they died, and they gave up two lives, the one they were living and the one they would have lived. When they died, they gave up their chance to be husbands and fathers and grandfathers. They gave up their chance to be revered old men. They gave up everything for our country, for us. And all we can do is remember. There's always someone who is remembering for us. No matter what time of year it is or what time of day, there are always people who come to this cemetery, leave a flag or a flower or a little rock on a headstone. And they stop and bow their heads and communicate what they wished to communicate. I think sometimes of General Matthew Ridgway, who the night before D-Day tossed sleepless on his cot and talked to the Lord and listened for the promise that God made to Joshua. I will not fail thee nor forsake thee. We are surrounded today by the dead of our wars. We owe them a debt we can never repay. All we can do is remember them and what they did and why they had to be brave for us. All we can do is try to see that other young men never have to join them. Today, as never before, we must pledge to remember the things that will continue the peace. Today, as never before, we must pray for God's help in broadening and deepening the peace we enjoy. Let us pray for freedom and justice and a more stable world. And let us make a compact today with the dead, a promise in the words for which General Ridgway listened: I will not fail thee nor forsake thee.
Pretty moving. Remember those days? Ronald Reagan was a great president. He had a lot of empathy. I'm sorry, I'm just really touched by all this, and I hope you are. I wanted to be solemn. I'm thinking about my friends, thinking about my own father who was a veteran. So let's continue. What makes a generation great? What is it that makes the greatest generation great? So let's take a look. I think you'll enjoy this.
On December 7th, 1941, Japan, like its infamous Axis partners, struck first and declared war afterwards. Costly to our Navy was the loss of war vessels, airplanes, and equipment, but more costly to Japan was the effectiveness of its foul attack in immediately unifying America in its determination to fight and win the war thrust upon it, and to win the peace that will follow.
Think about this. The World War II veterans and their families, their spouses, they lived through the Depression. They did all them things to prepare us for whatever we became. Their sacrifices are so unknown and so untold because of what type of people they are. The pride of a nation rests in the souls of those World War II veterans.
When the war hit, everybody got involved, according to my mother and my father. They didn't miss a beat. If you couldn't go into the military itself, you found a way. You bought war bonds, or you worked in a factory, or you did anything you could to help the cause. Without a fail, everybody that could do anything, they did something.
Everybody who volunteered, everybody who was conscripted or drafted, everybody who served gave up personal freedoms. And what they were fighting against was just so abhorrent that they could not stand on the sidelines and just let it pass.
It was either kill or be killed. The fact that our country was at war, I kind of had to just suck it up and drive on and be an engineer gunner on a bomber.
Mom did amazing things as a nurse in the U.S. Army Nurse Corps, following Omar Bradley across Europe and into Normandy. She was at Battle of the Bulge.
We were a 750-bed hospital, tent hospital, which is a kind of a crazy number. By that time, I'd been giving anesthesia for a long time, because when you're running 2 12-hour shifts, 10 tables, there have to be people giving anesthesia. We went on for months, busy, constantly busy, but you have to get to it. I shed a lot of tears, and I felt like I'd seen about every corner of the human body. Getting a little teary just thinking about all these years later. It's hard work. Happy to do it. Saying I had a chance to.
A good society is able to face schemes of world domination and foreign revolutions alike without fear. Freedom means the supremacy of human rights everywhere. That is no vision of a distant millennium. It is a definite basis for a kind of world attainable in our own time and generation.
General Eisenhower informs me that the forces of Germany have surrendered to the United Nations.
Tom Brokaw is the one that coined Greatest Generation. They paved the way for everything that we have now. But you bring that concept in front of somebody from that generation and they're puzzled. They don't know what you're talking about.
I don't quite go along with the Greatest Generation stuff. It's a fancy name. Anybody faced with exactly what we were faced with, I think would have reacted the same way, as they're human beings.
Just lost my dad, still got my mom. There's not many left anymore. It takes generation after generation building on the one before to make it a better place. But what kind of a legacy do you want to leave? What kind of things are going to be learned because you're here that's going to make it greater from here on out? You can do it too.
Greatest Generation. Onward and onward. One of my students just made captain in the United States Army. I'm so proud of him, and I let him know it. I'm thinking about my father, as I mentioned, thinking about my friends, Tommy Grasso, who died in Vietnam. I'm thinking about my favorite veteran, one of our dear friends' father, Sal Monti, who liberated Auschwitz. I'm sorry, not Auschwitz, but Dachau. The Soviets liberated Auschwitz. But Sal Monti, a liberator, the liberator of Dachau. So I'm going to sign off right now, but I'm going to show you one more very special video. And this is going to tug on your heartstrings. I saw this video a couple years back, and I saved it for this type of presentation. So I want to wish everybody well, stay safe, think about our vets, and God bless America. One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
What you're about to see now was a surprise for a little boy whose dad has been in Iraq. The scene is a small town in northwest Washington state. U.S. Navy Ensign Bill Hawes, who spent the past 7 months deployed to Iraq, decided to surprise his 6-year-old son, John, at school. John didn't know it till he laid eyes on his dad. It took young John a long time to stop crying, but when he did, he mustered the courage to introduce his dad to his classmates who had all written him letters while he was deployed. It's tough to take, but welcome home. We're back with more right after this.